Courtney, you do a great job, by the way. I'm super proud of you. I get to tell people I used to work with her. I sit down at a desk with her. We had inside jokes when we didn't get to finish our segments, like the best ever. So now that you're covering the Bears, and I saw you tweet this too, the Vikings are possibly going to win 13 games this season, and you now moved on to the Bears. Do you have a little bit of buyer's remorse when you look at like what the Vikings are going through and what the Bears are going through this season?
Not at all. I'm in Chicago, Ron. Like, like with all due respect, I love Minnesota.
Yeah.
I think about it all the time. It's an awesome place. I'm in the number 3 market in the country. I'm good. And I'm home. Like, that's the reason that, like, I took this job. I'm home. Like, my family's here, and I don't have to get in a car and drive 6 hours to go see my parents.
True.
And my parents are up there in age too. And, I've been in a career path. I've been on a career path for the last, 10, 12 years where you've been trying to get to one destination and be able to put roots down. So for me, that's the motivation that was the motivation for me in getting here to begin with. But no, I mean, I think it's awesome to get to see what's going on in Minnesota this year after, I covered like the end, like, 5 years of Mike Zimmer and that franchise, and knowing that it couldn't continue where it was going, like, to see what they've been able to do, to see that their plan to go about this with the competitive rebuild mindset that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah mentioned back in, was it like March? It's cool to see it work out, but in no way, shape, or form am I thinking, man, I should have stayed on the beat. I mean, like, as a journalist, you don't think about things like that. Like, is it cool to cover Super Bowls? Is it cool to cover playoff games? Yeah, I've done both. So I'm not pressed about that at all, but I think it's really neat when I get to talk about the Vikings on a national stage now. I mean, I've done it a lot on Around the Horn. I did it last week on First Take. I mean, that's cool to me because, when you have a team that you had ties to and that you covered for so many years, to get to talk about that expertise, like, on a national stage is something that I didn't get to do before. So that's cool.
Yeah, so I have to make sure too, because I know I'm doing something with Spice this summer out at his house, so I have to make sure we either meet up or get you out there with Lauren Screeden or something, all hang out or something. But so Courtney, looking at the Bears as a team facing the Vikings, looks like they're going to start. Not looks like they're going to start Nathan Peterman. They have a lot of guys. Sounds like they're not going to play now. Do you think that, not to say they're tanking, but do you think that because they know they're out of the playoffs, players' health and safety, let's get to the offseason, do you even think that they're truly, I mean, because we know what Nathan Peterman is. He can make some throws here and there. He can win some games if he needs to. But do you feel like this is going to be one of the ugliest games when you look at the Vikings offensive line, health issues, making sure Kirk Cousins doesn't get hurt, or make sure Justin Jefferson doesn't get hurt playing the playoffs? What do you make of this game?
From the Bears' perspective, this is what I expected. Even though, so like, I'll give you a timeline of the field stuff. So he hurts his hip, his right hip on like it was on the first drive, or either the first or second drive. And I see him on the sideline in the first quarter getting the Theragun. Like, the trainers are like massaging and trying to like manipulate his hip a little bit, stretch him out. He was on the table. He had his tablet. And then he went into the medical tent before halftime. So it's like, okay, something's going on here. He played through it, which was kind of questionable to begin with because the team's down by 4 touchdowns late in the fourth quarter, and the starting quarterback is still in the game. And of course, the coaching staff and even Fields kind of reiterated the same stuff of like, oh, it's experience, in-game reps, nothing like it. And after the game, Matt Eberflus said that if healthy, Justin would play. He kind of walked it back on Monday because, like, he was asked, well, you said Justin's going to play. Is there anybody else that you're considering either like playing or not playing? And they were talking about, well, it's ongoing conversations about everybody, including Justin. So that opens the door right then and there. Like, he's probably not going to play because Matt Eberflus said, Ryan Poles, to me, the way I looked at it is Eberflus said one thing on Sunday. Poles probably got in there and said, let's slow our roll on this here. Like, I understand from a coaching perspective, you want to win games. It's important. What's best for the Bears right now is not to win this game because they put themselves in better position. Of course, they're going to have to rely on Houston beating Indianapolis. But if they want that number 1 overall pick, which they're in line to get this week, if Houston loses and they lose too, like, the best thing to do is not to play Justin Fields. So I was not surprised at all that on Wednesday he pops up on the injury report with a hip, and he was DNP. And we find out before that, because they had a walkthrough, that he wouldn't be playing. And it's the right move. I think that they should have done this. I was fine if they wanted to play him and get him experience like in games. That's cool, but he didn't need to be playing when the team's down by 28 points late in the fourth quarter. I thought that was bordering on the line of negligence. But what we know right now is it's going to be a game that lacks a lot of starters for the Chicago Bears. I mean, they just put 2 offensive linemen, including their starting right guard, on injured reserve. One of their key special teamers went on injured reserve. You've had guys like really the onslaught of injuries since week 10, week 11. Every week there's something where a guy's getting put on IR and you're having backups play and role in different roles. And it's not going to be a pretty game by any stretch. But I think at this point, the Bears have an eye on the future, which is a wise thing to do because this offseason is going to be busy from free agency to the draft. And if you can improve your draft positioning, it's a smart thing to do. But I will say, like, it's not like they made this injury up. Like, he had a hip injury in the game. It was the first question that came out of my mouth was, what happened? We saw you go to the medical tent, and he said that it was on a rollout play. His hip kind of got twisted. So, I mean, there's validity to it. I just think that there's some Bears fans who wonder, well, he was, playing through a shoulder strain earlier, separated shoulder earlier. How come he could play through that, but he can't play through this? It just kind of feels like, they have picked and chosen certain things to latch onto as far as like, well, this is what we're going to do with Justin. This is what we're doing with everybody else. Like, but then again, at this bottom line, they made the smart move by not playing him because it not only protects the health of your quarterback, which is super important, but also being able to think about the long term. And if you can improve your draft positioning, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that too. I mean, at this point, 18th game or 18th week of the season, no chance of going to the playoffs. Getting hurt at this point is the worst because then you're not back at the start of the season, depending on how bad that injury is. Courtney, last one before we get to the Daily 3. When you look at the Minnesota Vikings, because you've covered them before, but I've seen you again on Around the Horn, all the shows talking about the Vikings, because everybody wants to talk about Kirk Cousins. Is he a fraud? Is he not a fraud? What does Kirk have to do to be considered a real deal quarterback in the eyes of a lot of people? And maybe it's just former players or people that just hate him, but it just feels like when you turn on the TV, not everybody, there's a lot of people that constantly are questioning, is Kirk Cousins real or is this just a mirage?
And like, that's the thing this year. Like, I've given Kirk a lot of credit, and I was critical on him. Like when I covered the Vikings, and I think a lot of it was just because people see a contract and they see dollar signs and they see somebody not living up to that. It's easy to poke holes and like just because it affected the roster construction. Go back to 2020 when that extension got signed and what the things that they weren't able to do because of that. But now, I mean, anybody who's looking at this team and saying, I mean, obviously Kirk's had moments like that stuff is never going to go away. I mean, he is who he is at this age, 33, 34 years old. And he's a good quarterback. I think being in a place where he is empowered by the head coach and the front office too, with the weapons that they have around him. I mean, my goodness, the TJ Hawkinson trade, that one seemed to, kind of came out of nowhere. And it really worked out for them just to be able to have that presence at tight end while Irv Smith had been out. Like, Kirk has not been the problem though. I mean, my issue, and this is what I will continue to harp on, Green Bay has put up 41 points on this team. This defense has a lot of issues. They've given up like routinely 400 plus yards a game. They're giving up massive chunk plays. There's no pass. Like, you think the Bears pass rush is bad. It is. Don't get me wrong, Ron, but like, think about how many defensive linemen, like where the sacks are coming from Minnesota this year.
Yeah.
Not really up front. It's not Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter just annihilating everybody. So it's kind of like that to me is like the biggest concern I'm going to have with this team in the playoffs. But Kirk's already done what Dak has not done. And I said this last week. He's won a road playoff game. And think what you will about the way that game ended in New Orleans. Kirk has that on his resume. I think that I just worry about the defense letting this team down because when you have the talent to overcome all of these deficits and win scores by one game, win games by one score, that's great. Eventually, like, that's a really tall ask to get teams to do that. And I just feel like they're going to meet their match in the playoffs. It might not be against the Giants in the first round, but it would certainly be in the divisional playoffs where there's going to be a hurdle that I don't think that they can overcome if their defense is playing the way that we've seen these last couple games.